Is Vatican II merely a pastoral council? Stick around to find out.
You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Reason and Theology late night stream. Certainly. I see Josh is in the chat saying, is this a late night stream? Yes, it is. It's a live one. So here we are. We're talking about Vatican II. Is it merely a pastoral council, or is it also doctrinal? Is there really a difference between a pastoral versus a doctrinal council? That's what we're going to look at here. But first, let me remind you, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Please help me grow this channel. And of course, hit the bell for notifications so you know when I go live. And also hit the like button if you enjoy this video. And in part, this is sponsored by Real Estate for Life. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home and you want to support the pro-life movement, certainly check them out. realestateforlife.org. Sean Matthew, I see you there in the chat. He's saying, loving the late night streams. Yeah, it's been a little while since we've done one. I've been gravitating towards, 12 p.m. Central streams. So here we are. I see a couple questions in the chat. Let me grab those real quick. Michael, have you made a video addressing whether or not the Novus Ordo is a new rite? In fact, I did. I did talk on that particular issue on my presentation, whether or not Pope Francis has the authority to ban the TLM, I think was the name of the video. In fact, let me just pull it up real quick just so I can be sure of the title. And that way you can pull it up. And part of that video does address that question. But the name of the video is, here it is. Can Pope Francis ban the Latin Mass? More than 5 quotes. That's the name of the video. So check it out because I do go over that there. But today we're focusing on the Second Vatican Council. So let's try to keep, however, the questions limited to that. In fact, I'd be happy to answer some questions related to that, but towards the end of the stream. And by the way, I want to say shout out to Keith Nestor. I did a show with him earlier today in studio, in person. So go and check it out if you haven't already. Also, of course, go and subscribe to his channel. I had the opportunity of praying the rosary with him. So I did the Rosary Crew show with him. And that was just such a blessing. He's such a great guy. Both he and his wife came and visited, and we just really enjoyed them. So it was a great visit. And we go also check out his Instagram. We have a little spoof that we did together, a little skit. So certainly check that out. But I don't know if you can tell, but the camera probably looks a little different. The background looks a little different. I probably look a little bit crisper. I guess that's the proper way to say it, right? Or is it more crisp? Is it crisper or more crisp? Sharper. The camera looks sharper than before. And that is thanks to Keith Nestor. The guy has some serious expertise with photography. In fact, he did that professionally prior to YouTube. And so I'm like, man, help me out, because I know my equipment can do more than what I'm getting from it, but I need help with, getting the particular settings and lighting right. And he was kind enough to do that. So here we are. Hopefully you could tell a significant difference in the quality of the video. I certainly can tell. So again, shout out to Keith for helping me out with that. But what I want to do, I know I talk about this dissertation very often, and I'm going to review portions of it more frequently, and that is the dissertation of Dr. Lawrence King from CUA. I had him on the show before, and we spoke about especially the question of Dignitatis Humanae, if I recall correctly. Oh, and I see Pints with Aquinas in the chat. He says, "What's up, brother?" Hey, we were talking about you. We just mentioned you in the show earlier with Keith Nestor. I don't know if you had a chance to see it yet, but the question was, um, what's the difference between American steaks and Australian steaks? And I was like, I bet Matt knows. So maybe you can weigh in on that one for us. But anyways, I often talk about this dissertation with Dr. King. I think it is one of the most important um, dissertations I've ever read. It's on non-definitive teachings specifically and how those work, the history of them, and specifically how non-definitive teachings of the church work. And it's very much an inspiration for my own dissertation. And so there's just so much to glean from it. But he does have a section here in the dissertation where he's discussing the phenomenon of a pastoral council. And that's where I really want to go to consult. Pints with Aquinas, by the way, says um, ours are bad. Is that right? Okay. Well, I haven't had Australian steaks before, so I don't know. I'll have to take your word on that one. But I'm also not a huge fan of American steaks, which is certainly an issue because here in Louisiana, at least in Monroe where I'm at, it's nothing but steakhouses, which is probably why I don't really like them because I'm burnt out on them. But they have nothing but steakhouse after steakhouse after steakhouse. And then we'll see a new restaurant is opening. And then it's like, oh, another steakhouse. Okay. Well, if you love steakhouses, you'd love Monroe. But anyways, yeah, so let's take a look at this from Dr. King's dissertation because I found this very helpful and concise. Certainly much more can be said about the question of a pastoral council, but let's dip our toes by starting with this. This is from chapter 2 of his dissertation, which is available online for free. I'll put a link to it in the description. Again, anything concerning non-definitive teachings, specifically of the magisterium and how they work, this is the go-to place. There's unfortunately no book written that goes over it in any kind of detail to this extent. Um, Now, you do have some books that talk about it briefly, sure. You got Jimmy Akin's book on the magisterium, Dulles, um, certainly Sullivan, but his dissertation is about 473 pages, as you can see. So it's much more in depth. So if again you're needing resources on how the magisterium works, especially with non-definitive, that is non-infallible teachings, this is the go-to place. And it's written in a very accessible way. And it's also accessible insofar as it's free online. Yeah, I mean, you can't beat that. So okay, here's where it starts. Page this is 113 of my PDF. In the 1950s, theologians had become increasingly interested in the weight of non-definitive magisterial teachings, especially that in papal encyclicals. And I do want to pause there and say that's certainly true. In the 50s, you start to see interest. That doesn't mean, and he's not suggesting, in fact, he gives a survey of it prior to the 20th century, but there was interest in non-definitive teachings even prior to the 20th century, but it's especially in the last 100 years where you start to see, maybe a little bit more than that, where you start to see interest in non-definitive teachings, in part due to the rise and prominence of encyclicals. Because you have these very, very lengthy encyclicals, questions arose like, okay, well, is everything in this infallible? Because usually popes historically kind of intervened only in really, really crucial cases. So it's like these long papal encyclicals, is everything in this thing infallible or not? So we had to really start teasing out those kinds of questions. And certainly in the 50s, you see a prominence of this. And he goes, so it was not surprising that the Second Vatican Council addressed this issue in a variety of ways. During the 2 decades following the council, let me adjust my screen there. Sorry. Okay. During the 2 decades following the council, most of the theological investigations of non definitive authoritative teaching focused on determining the weight of the teachings of Vatican II itself. These matters are the primary focus in this chapter, and especially because what he does is he takes the Dignitatis Humanae as a test case. And what he specifically does in the dissertation is, after outlining for nearly 400 pages how non definitive teachings work, and how to evaluate magisterial documents and weigh magisterial documents, he then asks the question, okay, well, if there's a difference with the 19th century popes on the question of religious liberty and the Second Vatican Council, if there's a difference there, which one would outweigh the other? And so his focus is especially on Dignitatis Humanae. So Vatican II certainly comes into scope for him in the dissertation. And so he addresses the question of a pastoral council. And this phenomenon comes up constantly, right? I mean, we hear people all the time saying, I can just dismiss Vatican II. It was just a pastoral council. So it's used as a pretext to dismiss anything that it says in there under the pretense of, it's just a pastoral council. And what pastoral council usually is meant whenever people throw the term around like that is, oh, it's non-authoritative. It's merely disciplinary. It's not authoritative. Take it or leave it. It's merely an opinion. That's how people are using the term pastoral. But when you actually look at Vatican II, not only the text itself, but the acts surrounding the Second Vatican Council, which helps bring into scope the proper interpretation and intent of the council, then you start to see, okay, wait, no, that's not what was meant and is meant by Vatican II being a pastoral council. Somebody rightly points out, John L. rightly points out in the chat, Jesus was pastoral, therefore Jesus wasn't authoritative. Spot on, spot on, spot on. Being pastoral is not and should not be juxtaposed with doctrinal and teachings being authoritative, right? They're actually things that go together. Pastoral more refers to how it's expressed, how the teachings are expressed. Nonetheless, they're still teachings. So it's not like pastoral versus teaching. No, pastoral is a particular way to articulate a teaching. Nonetheless, it's still a teaching, and it still demands assent, and it's still authoritative because it's a teaching. Okay, so he says nearly 4 years passed before Pope John the 23rd's announcement of the council in 1959 of January and its opening in October 1962. During that time, the Pope frequently described the upcoming council as pastoral in character. Pope John's opening address recommended the medicine of mercy and explanations rather than condemnations. We looked at that the other day. But what did this mean in practice? Did this mean that, there's no teachings there? In July of 1959, Cardinal Tardini, the Secretary of State for the Vatican, explained that this meant that the council would be more practical than dogmatic in character, more pastoral than ideological, and will provide norms rather than definitions. But he explicates that more. And indeed, the schemas prepared before the first session of the council avoided anathemas and theological censors. A note attached to the first schema of the church stated, all of these things are set out in a pastoral style, lest a dogmatic text appear too juridical. So it pertains more to style rather than anything else. And for those who may not be familiar, a schema is kind of like a rough draft of a conciliar document. It's the conciliar document effectively in its first proposed phase, if you will, just as a working definition for our purposes. As early as 1964, some council fathers who were happy with the direction Vatican II was taking began to argue that since this was merely a pastoral council, its decrees would not be binding in the same way that a traditional council's decrees might be. perhaps to rebut such views. Paul VI's speech at the opening of the third session, September 14th, 1964, included the following reminder. Very important to pay attention to this quote. The vast majority of people are not aware of it, and it has a lot of implications. But to rebut that misunderstanding that pastoral just merely means that it's not binding, or means that it's not binding, to rebut that, Paul VI says this. The council's task is to bring certain troublesome theological controversies to a close. Did you hear that? He's bringing some theological questions to a close. What does that tell you? That tells you there is going to be a theological intervention that settles a theological matter, i.e., doctrinal, right? There's a doctrinal decision that's going to settle things that prior to that were open to debate. This is something a lot of people don't realize about Vatican II, but Vatican II did settle some theological questions that were in dispute prior to the Second Vatican Council. He's going to give you an example here. But the quote continues, its task is to finally manifest to the faithful of the Catholic Church and to our brothers and sisters from separated communities what is the true concept of the orders of sacred hierarchy, of which it is said the Holy Spirit has set up overseers, that is bishops, to govern the Church of God, Acts 20:28, and indeed with a firm authority which may not be called into doubt. He's saying the question of the sacramentality of the episcopate prior to the Second Vatican Council was in question. There were some theological considerations there where there's a debate on, like, is a bishop a higher grade sacramentally than a priest? Or is a bishop just a glorified priest, a priest with jurisdiction? Or are they a separate grade of the sacrament of ordination? Well, we know that the Second Vatican Council settled, well, no, it's actually a separate grade. It's the highest grade, if you will, for holy orders. It's not that bishops are just glorified priests. Although the question of whether or not a priest can still function as an extraordinary minister of ordination, which Ludwig Ott speaks about in his Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma, that question, however, I don't think has been overturned by this decision of the Second Vatican Council. I'll just throw that out because there is a question on, can a priest serve as an extraordinary minister of the sacrament of ordination to the priesthood, not to the episcopate, but to the priesthood. And historically, it does seem that there's evidence that the popes have said yes. Ott gives some instances. And I don't think that this entirely excludes that position yet. So in other words, I still think that that question is still open. However, I could be wrong. But the question of whether or not the episcopate is of a separate grade or not than the priesthood, that has been settled by the Second Vatican Council in its document Lumen Gentium, paragraph 21 specifically. And many argue that it is a definitive teaching of the Second Vatican Council. And the reason why is you can see Paul VI saying, which may not be called into doubt. Is the intention here to say that Vatican II is settling this? Well, it's certainly settling it. Is it settling it in a definitive way? I don't know. What does he mean by may not be called into doubt? I suppose it's possible to say that of a non-definitive teaching, but it would certainly be an odd thing to say of a non-definitive teaching. So that kind of language there does kind of lend itself to the intention being to define the matter definitively. But nonetheless, at the very least, we have an authoritative teaching on the question. But it's a teaching, right? It's not merely pastoral as far as merely disciplinary and something that can just be dismissed. That's not the proper understanding of pastoral, because clearly there are doctrinal interventions here. And frankly, you cannot read the documents of the Second Vatican Council and ever come away saying, gee, I wonder if this is doctrinal in nature. It's impossible to read Vatican II's documents and really come away with that impression, right? It's so clear that it's filled with the doctrine. It's not just disciplinary in nature. There's a ton of things in Vatican II that are doctrinal, and not all things that were already settled doctrinally, but some things that are original to the Second Vatican Council, as we're seeing here. It continues. Pope Paul was referring specifically to the debate about whether episcopal ordination was truly the highest form of the sacrament of holy orders, a matter that had been often debated in recent years, and to which Lumen Gentium would ultimately give a clear answer. But more generally, he was asserting that Vatican II, despite its pastoral character, was able to teach doctrine with authority, even ending debate on contentious issues. So again, it is inappropriate to juxtapose pastoral with doctrinal. They are not mutually exclusive. It is possible to communicate something doctrinally in a pastoral way. It continues. Similarly, in his speech at the last public session of the council, Paul VI stated the following. This is the quote that's a little bit more known. One thing must be noted here, namely, that the teaching authority of the church, even though not wishing to issue extraordinary dogmatic pronouncements, pay attention to that specific qualification, you could have you could have some instances that are Catholic doctrine rather than dogma, definitive Catholic doctrine pronouncements that would be different than dogmatic. So just because he's speaking about there not being any new dogmatic pronouncements doesn't mean that there aren't any definitive Catholic teachings that are new. And in the case of the sacramentality of the episcopate, that would be a question of definitive Catholic doctrine or non-definitive Catholic doctrine rather than dogma. So what that translates into is Lumen Gentium 21 and the settlement of this question on the nature of the hierarchy. It could actually be an infallible teaching of Vatican II. But it's an infallible teaching as far as what's called a secondary object of infallibility, definitive Catholic doctrine, rather than a primary object of infallibility, dogmatic teachings. So that's an important qualification that is often overlooked by most people who quote this to you, especially on YouTube. You got YouTubers out there who will quote this and they'll use this as a proof text to say, you see, Vatican II has no new infallible teachings. That does not logically follow from what we just read, because he's specifically only talking about dogmas. But you do have infallible teachings that are secondary objects and are not dogmatic. And those are not excluded by this statement here. But you would have to pay attention to those distinctions to know that. So anybody that you ever hear use this quote to tell you there are no infallible teachings at Vatican II, you can automatically know that person does not understand the basics of the magisterium. You can automatically know that person is not competent to speak on questions of the magisterium, because this is just a basic question of the teaching authority of the magisterium. Okay, so it continues. Though not wishing to issue extraordinary dogmatic pronouncements, has made thoroughly known its authoritative teaching on a number of questions which today weigh upon man's conscience and activity, descending, so to speak, into a dialogue with him, but ever preserving its own authority and force. So, but you notice what he says there. Authoritative teaching. Oh, wait, I thought this was just a pastoral council. Well, yeah, but pastoral is not necessarily against teaching, right? Those things are compatible. They don't exclude each other. So here you have Paul VI very clearly in the last public session noting that Vatican II is full of authoritative teachings. So that's the end of his brief section on the question of whether or not Vatican II is merely a pastoral council and what does it mean to be pastoral. And though it's brief, I think it's actually incredibly helpful because he gets to the heart of the matter by number one pointing out Paul VI on the question of the sacramentality of the episcopate, and then number two, the last public session where it's very openly admitted Vatican II has authoritative teachings, which, as I said, is impossible to not know unless you haven't read Vatican II. For anybody who has ever sat down and read the documents of Vatican II, I've never heard anybody who's actually read the documents of Vatican II say that Vatican II is merely a pastoral council, as if to suggest that it has no authoritative teachings, because it is full of them. I mean, just read Lumen Gentium, read Dignitatis Humanae, read the first paragraph of Dignitatis Humanae. Read Lumen Gentium 25. Read De Verbum. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on and on. It's filled with teachings. Let's see. Christian Catholic Media says nerding out on some Vatican II theology. Thanks, Michael. Hey, glad to do it. I'm glad to hear that. Diego asks, how long does the church studies and investigations a certain topic to be considered doctrine or dogma? Just curious. Okay, if I understand your question correctly, I think what you're asking me is there a certain time period that the church has to study a question for it to be either dogma or doctrine? Is that the question? If so, no, the question is not one of time period. The question is, what exercise of authority does it offer? Does it offer a authority that is settling the question? If it's settling the question, it's definitive. Now, you can still, in this category of definitive teachings, have two kinds of teachings: those that are primary objects and those that are secondary objects. Primary objects are going to be things divinely revealed by God and confirmed by the church as divinely revealed. And then secondary objects are going to be things that aren't divinely revealed by God per se, but are intimately connected to something revealed by God. So, something that might be necessary to maintain historically or logically to defend something that is revealed by God. Those are what's called secondary objects of infallibility. In the first case, primary objects, if the church definitively teaches one of those, something that's in divine revelation, it's called dogma. If the church definitively teaches something that is of the second category, secondary objects, it's called definitive Catholic doctrine. And if the church teaches something authoritatively, but it's not giving that last word on it, it's not definitively teaching it, it's called non-definitive Catholic teachings. So again, it's not a question of how long did it take to study a particular question. It's more what kind of authority did it use, and also the teaching itself. Is it divinely revealed by God, or is it something merely related to something revealed by God? So the object of the teaching authority. That's what it's going to depend on. Great question. Father Brown says, Vatican II is just a pastoral council. You're just a pastoral council. That's a good one. I like that. That's going to be my comeback. And anytime somebody says that, you're a pastoral council. Your face is a pastoral council. Let's see. Had to address someone on this a couple weeks ago on Facebook, and the answer is the council is authoritative, and they had authoritative teachings there. Right. Yeah. I would ask if a person tells you, Vatican II is merely pastoral, it's, you can take it or leave it. Ask that person, have you ever read the documents of Vatican II? The answer is probably going to be no. And if the answer is yes, say, well, that's interesting. How did you get past the document Lumen Gentium and come away with that perspective? I mean, let's see. Looking through the chat here. Teresa says 9 years. I read Catechism first, 2 years before I started RCIA. That's awesome. Looking through the chat. I recall that some of the positives that Vatican II brought forth some traditions long forgotten. That's also true. Also true. I see Anthony says didn't get a notification from YouTube. Did you hit the bell? Let's see. Trying to see if there were any other questions. John L says all ecumenical councils are pastoral. I get what you're saying. You know, we can say that some were less pastoral than others. Pastoral here meaning a good example of this would be the issuing of anathemas or not, whether to include anathemas or not. One of the intentions of Vatican II being pastoral was to avoid anathemas. And the intention here was to say, okay, well, maybe we can attract more converts by not anathematizing certain positions. I totally get the intention, but I question whether or not that's really been effective. So I'm kind of the bring back the anathemas kind of guy. How does Vatican II affect Byzantine Catholics or other Eastern rites? Very positively. You can see this with some Eastern Catholic theologians who note that with Vatican II, that's where you really start to have an Eastern Catholic theology, a uniquely Eastern Catholic theology, not merely a reiteration of Latin theology, and not merely a reiteration of Eastern Orthodox theology, but a uniquely Eastern Catholic theology. You could see Robert Taft, who issued a lecture on that, I believe, with Byzantine Catholic Seminary. And that's available online on YouTube for free. And he'll talk about the significance of Vatican II there. But also Vatican II positively impacted the Eastern Catholic liturgy, because prior to Vatican II, the Eastern churches were kind of held captive to Rome, that in some ways, however, it had been reforming these things even prior to Vatican II. But in some ways, the Eastern churches in communion with Rome were kind of held captive to Rome, who wanted to Latinize a lot of the Eastern churches in some ways. Again, many of the preconciliar popes had been working against that, such as Leo XIII. He had been trying to undo that and call the Eastern churches to be faithful to their own Eastern traditions and not to interfere with Latinizations. But with Vatican II expressing that all of the rites of the church are equally venerable, and it's not like the Latin rite is superior to any of the Eastern rites. They're all equally valuable and venerable. And there was additionally a call for the Eastern churches to be faithful to and express their Eastern traditions more authentically. Because of that, there has been a strong revival of returning to our Eastern roots in the Eastern churches since the time of the Second Vatican Council. So those are a few ways in which the Byzantine churches have been impacted. Let's see. Let's see. Anthony says, you really asked me that question. Of course, I hit the bell. You never know. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with YouTube there. What text is the best commentary on Vatican II? Yeah, are you familiar with Pink's paper on Dignitatis Humanae? Pink is great. Did you also check out Michael Dunningan's interview on my channel on Dignitatis Humanae? You may want to check that one out too. He gives a slightly different take than Thomas Pink, but Yeah, certainly those are great guys to go to, no doubt. Um, Now, Vorgrimler is the main set on commentaries for Vatican II, but it costs a pretty penny, you know. Blackwood says lighting looks good, Michael. Thank you, and thank Keith Nestor for that. He's an awesome man. He helped me set up my equipment better. I knew I could get more out of it with the help of an expert, and he did that for me. Did you see the Pope? Father asked me, did you see the Pope praying the Our Father with those Orthodox priests? It looked like they all crossed themselves like lads at the end. Did I see that right? I did watch it, but I didn't pay attention to which way they crossed themselves. But you know what? When in Rome, right? When in Rome. Why not? Why not? Why not? If you're in Rome, let's do it the Roman way. I don't have a problem with that. Monica said, so great to see Keith's visit. Yeah, that was great. I really enjoyed that. Great guy. What else we got? Father says he loved it. Yeah, indeed. Okay. Conciliar Octet by Iden Nichols. Yeah, that's a good book. Yeah, I got that one. So I think I grabbed everything from the chat. Maybe in the future, ecumenical councils could write documents that are similar to Vatican II, but also include a lists of anathemas at the end. Yeah. There was a suggestion to have the documents of Vatican II be written in more technical and theological language, and then have a separate version written in a more accessible way for the average person who's non-Christian. That was kind of pitched around as an idea and it was rejected, but I don't know. Maybe that's a good idea moving forward. Let's see. Keith is a Catholic YouTube rock star, right? And he knows how to play the drums too. So I mean, I guess he kind of is a rock star. Let's see. Did I grab everything from the chat? I think I may have. So anyways, I hope this was helpful. If it has been, let me know. If you want to see me review various parts of the dissertation on questions of the magisterium from Dr. King's dissertation, let me know. So if you enjoyed this video, you want to see more stuff like this, I'd be happy to. I mean, I'm obviously not going to sit here and read his entire 473-page dissertation to you, but I can take out some of the highlights and kind of cover some of those things with his aid, because this is just an incredibly accessible and scholarly and helpful work. I am just impressed by it. Time and time again, I refer back to it, and it's just so helpful. So if you want to see more of this, let me know. Jacob says, I love Vatican II. Please convert to Maronite faith. I had a Maronite liturgy here before. Yeah, it was pretty cool. What would be cool? Go through all the church councils and identify something about them that was a first. I think you can do that with almost all of the ecumenical councils. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, how the turntables have turned. An Office reference. I get y'all. That's great. Okay. I think I grabbed all the questions from the chat. So again, if you want to see more of this, let me know. Put it in the comment section. Hit the like button. Certainly hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications so you know when I go live. And if you want to support what I'm doing, check me out, patreon.com/reason and theology. You'll get access to extra content, and you'll be able to enable me to continue to make these videos available to everyone for free on YouTube. So again, if you believe in what I'm doing, check me out there, patreon.com/reason and theology. That's going to do it, y'all. I'll see you later. God bless. Are you confused about how Catholic teaching authority works? With encyclicals, papal bulls, councils, and many other things, it's easy to get confused on what is authoritative and what is not. Fortunately, at maximusinstitute.com, I have prepared a course explaining the magisterium from A to Z. Visit the website and check out the course Understanding the Magisterium for more information.
If you're looking to buy or sell a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, you're going to want to call Real Estate for Life, and they're going to connect you with a Catholic agent. Now, that agent will donate a portion of their commission upon sale, and Real Estate for Life will donate 75% of that gift to a pro-life organization at no cost to you. Call Real Estate for Life at 1-877-LIFE-US1 or text them 248-431-1440. If you care about the pro-life cause, call them now.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button. God bless.